At 6% fuel remaining, Major Carroll Smith realized the mathematics were impossible. 1 aircraft, 12 Japanese bombers inbound, 3 hours of fuel. The numbers did not work. But that was not the strangest part of what happened over the Philippine Islands on December 29, 1944. 2 hours before takeoff, Smith received a manila envelope marked classified. Inside, a single page from Naval Intelligence. 12 enemy bombers confirmed heading toward Muro. Expected arrival 2300 hours. Standard defensive briefing. Then Smith read the last line. 1 target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. Smith looked up at the intelligence officer. What does that mean? The officer's expression did not change. We don't know, Major. Your orders are to engage all targets. Smith folded the paper. All targets? All targets. The intelligence officer left without another word. Smith sat alone in the briefing room, reading the line again. 1 target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. Not Japanese. Then what? American aircraft did not fly over Muro at night. Allied bombers operated during daylight. The Japanese owned the darkness. Until now. Smith walked across Mawire Field toward his aircraft. The P-61 Black Widow sat waiting, its twin engines and wide wingspan creating a silhouette unlike any other fighter in the Pacific. The aircraft looked predatory, dangerous, which was exactly what Northrop intended when they designed it. But Smith's aircraft was different. It carried modifications not present on standard Black Widows. Experimental systems, classified equipment. Smith was not supposed to know about most of it. The ground crews worked on certain components only at night, under blackout conditions. When Smith asked questions, he received no answers. 3 weeks earlier, Smith's radar operator, Lieutenant Philip Porter, had tracked something over the Pacific Ocean. Porter was exceptional at his job. He could read radar returns better than anyone in the squadron. He knew the difference between a B-24 returning from patrol and a Japanese bomber at 15 miles range. He could identify aircraft types by their radar signatures alone. But on that flight 3 weeks ago, Porter had tracked something he could not identify. The contact appeared on his scope, moving at impossible speed. 300 knots, then 400. Then the return changed shape, elongated, then vanished. Porter filed his report. 2 days later, intelligence officers arrived from Manila. They interviewed Porter for 6 hours. When Porter emerged from the debriefing, he would not discuss what happened. Smith asked him directly. Porter just shook his head. I signed papers. I cannot talk about it. Now, Porter sat in the radar operator compartment behind Smith, checking his equipment. Smith trusted Porter completely. They had flown 43 combat missions together, 4 confirmed kills. Porter's skill made every intercept possible. Without him, Smith was just another pilot flying blind through darkness. Smith climbed into the cockpit. The instrument panel glowed faintly. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, fuel gauge, engine temperature, oil pressure, and the small radar scope that would show targets once Porter vectored him close enough. Everything looked normal. But Smith kept thinking about that intelligence report. 1 target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. At 2300 hours, ground control confirmed radar contact. Multiple bogies inbound from the north. Smith started the engines. The twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines roared to life. 2,000 horsepower each, 4,000 total. Enough power to push the Black Widow through the air at 366 miles per hour. Fast enough to catch any Japanese bomber. Smith checked his fuel. Full tanks, 646 gallons, 3 hours of flight time at cruise settings. The mathematics were simple. Each intercept required approximately 10 minutes. Track the target, close to firing range. Engage. Confirm the kill. Return to search pattern. 10 minutes per bomber. 12 bombers. 120 minutes total. 2 hours. Except Smith had to find them first. Search time added 30 minutes. That meant 2.5 hours minimum. He had 3 hours of fuel. Minutes safety margin. Possible. Barely. But Smith knew something else. Something the intelligence briefing had not mentioned. His aircraft burned fuel faster than standard P-61s. The experimental systems drew additional power. The modifications added weight. Smith's actual flight time was closer to 2 hours 45 minutes, which meant 15 minutes safety margin. Not enough for 12 intercepts. Smith released the brakes. The Black Widow rolled forward. The crushed coral runway stretched ahead into complete darkness. No lights, no visual references. Smith relied entirely on instruments. At 80 knots, he pulled back on the control column. The aircraft lifted smoothly. Gear up, flaps up, climb power. Porter's voice came through the intercom. I have 4 contacts bearing 0, 3, 5 degrees, range 8 miles, altitude 8,000 feet. 4 contacts, not 12. Smith keyed his microphone. Confirm 4 contacts? Porter paused. I am showing 4 distinct returns. But the signatures are wrong. Wrong how? They do not match the recognition profiles. These are not Betty bombers, not Helen bombers, not anything in the manual. Smith felt something cold move through his chest. The intelligence report. 1 target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. Porter was seeing 4 unknowns. What are they? Porter did not answer immediately. Smith could hear him adjusting his radar scope, checking calibrations. Finally, Porter spoke. I do not know, but they are heading directly toward Muro. Smith pushed the throttles forward. The Black Widow accelerated. 200 knots, 250, 300. He climbed toward 8,000 feet. Porter called out vectors. Left 5 degrees. Up 2 degrees. Range 6 miles. Through the cockpit canopy, Smith saw nothing. No moon, no stars. Cloud cover obscured everything. The Japanese had chosen this night specifically. Complete darkness meant their bombers would be invisible. But the Japanese did not know about the SCR-720 radar. They did not know about the Black Widow. They believed darkness made them safe. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Before we continue with what Smith saw when he caught up with those 4 targets, let me tell you something. Stories like this almost disappeared. The men who flew these missions, the things they encountered, the classified reports that got buried in archives for decades. We are trying to bring them back. If this matters to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more stories like this. Real accounts, declassified documents, things that do not make it into standard history books. Alright, back to December 29, 1944. Smith was closing on 4 targets that should not exist, and he was about to discover that 12 bombers was not the real problem. Range 4 miles. Smith activated his own radar scope, a small display integrated into the instrument panel. When targets got close enough, he could track them independently. The scope showed 4 returns. Porter was right. The signatures looked wrong. Too large for fighters, too fast for bombers. And they were flying in formation. Precise spacing. Professional. Not the loose formations Japanese bombers typically used. Smith armed his cannons. 4 20mm Hispano M2 cannons, mounted in the lower fuselage. 200 rounds per cannon. 800 rounds total. Enough for approximately 40 seconds of sustained fire. But Smith would not need 40 seconds. Night fighter doctrine called for short bursts. 2 seconds maximum. Get close. Fire. Move to the next target. Range 2 miles. Smith could feel his heart rate increasing. Not from fear. From anticipation. This was what he had trained for. 18 months of night fighter training. Hundreds of hours in the Black Widow. Learning to trust instruments. Learning to trust Porter. Learning to kill in complete darkness. Range 1 mile. The first target appeared on Smith's scope. Large return. Steady course. No evasive action. The bomber crew had no idea Smith was behind them. No tail warning radar. No way to detect a pursuing night fighter. They flew in darkness believing they were invisible. In 30 seconds, they would learn the truth. But as Smith closed to 800 yards, Porter's voice came through the intercom again. Something strange in his tone. Something Smith had never heard before. Uncertainty. Major, I am getting additional returns. Behind the 4 contacts. Farther out. How many? Porter paused. 8 more. No. Wait. 9. No. The returns are splitting. Multiplying. Smith did not take his eyes off the target ahead. How many total? 12. But the radar signatures keep changing, like they are not solid objects. Smith felt the temperature in the cockpit drop. Or perhaps it was just his imagination. 12 bombers. Just like the intelligence report said. But Porter was seeing them appear and disappear, splitting and multiplying. That was not how radar worked. That was not how anything worked. Range 600 yards. Smith could see the first target now. A dark shape against slightly darker clouds. Faint orange glow from engine exhausts. The bomber looked real enough. Solid. Physical. But Porter's radar showed something impossible happening behind it. Smith made a decision. Engage the first target. Confirm it was real. then worry about the others. He centered the target in his gun sight. Range 400 yards. His finger moved to the trigger, and in that moment, before he fired, Smith saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The bomber's fuselage was the wrong shape. Too smooth, too streamlined. Not like any Japanese bomber he had ever seen. What he was about to shoot down was not supposed to exist. And the classified envelope he had received 2 hours earlier suddenly made terrible sense. One target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. They knew. Intelligence knew. They sent him anyway. Smith squeezed the trigger. The 4 cannons fired in unison. 48 shells streamed toward the target at 2,800 feet per second. And what happened next changed everything. The bomber exploded. But the explosion was wrong. Normal aircraft fires burned orange and red. Fuel ignited. Metal twisted. Debris scattered in predictable patterns. Smith had seen it 4 times before on previous missions. He knew what a dying bomber looked like. This was different. The flames burned blue-white, almost greenish at the edges. The aircraft did not fall. It tumbled, spinning end over end like a leaf caught in wind. Completely wrong aerodynamics. And the debris field glowed, pieces of wreckage emitting their own light as they fell toward the ocean below. Porter's voice cracked through the intercom. "Did you see that?" Smith could not answer immediately. He watched the burning wreckage disappear into clouds. The glow persisted for 15 seconds after the aircraft should have hit the water. Then, darkness. Porter spoke again. "Major, the radar returns. They changed the moment you fired." "Changed how?" "The other 11 contacts. They all shifted positions simultaneously, like they knew what happened. Aircraft did not move simultaneously unless they were in tight formation with radio communication. But Porter had tracked these targets at different altitudes, different headings, spread across 20 miles of sky. They should not be able to coordinate. Smith checked his fuel. 94% remaining. He had burned 6% in 10 minutes. The mathematics were getting worse. But he could not think about that now. "Vector me to the next target." Porter hesitated. "Major, I need to tell you something about 3 weeks ago. What I tracked over the Pacific." "Not now, Porter. You need to know. The contact I tracked moved at speeds impossible for 1944 technology. The intelligence officers who debriefed me asked specific questions. Had I ever heard of Foo Fighters? Did I know about the phenomenon reports from European theater?" Smith felt ice in his stomach. Foo Fighters. Allied pilots in Europe had reported them for months. Glowing spheres that followed aircraft. Performed impossible maneuvers. Appeared and disappeared. Intelligence dismissed them as ball lightning. Atmospheric phenomena. Pilot fatigue. Mass hallucination. But the reports kept coming. Dozens of experienced pilots. Consistent descriptions. Objects that defied known physics. The Army Air Force classified all Foo Fighter reports in August 1944. Pilots were ordered to stop filing them. Porter continued. "The officers told me Foo Fighters were appearing in the Pacific now. Asked if I had seen craft matching certain descriptions. They showed me drawings, elongated shapes, disc-shaped objects, triangular configurations. I had never seen the drawings before, but the radar return I tracked matched one of them exactly." Smith's hands tightened on the control column. "What did they tell you?" "That if I encountered similar contacts again, I was to track them normally, engage if ordered, report through classified channels only. They said Project Nightfall was monitoring the situation." Project Nightfall. The experimental program Smith had trained under at Orlando Army Airfield. The program that selected 12 pilots based on psychological profiles, testing their reactions to unexplained phenomena, training them to remain calm during encounters with unknowns. Smith had wondered why the training included scenarios that seemed impossible. Targets moving at supersonic speeds, objects appearing on radar then vanishing, aircraft performing maneuvers that would kill any human pilot from G-forces. The instructors called it advanced combat simulation, preparing for future threats. Smith had assumed they meant German jet fighters, Nazi wonder weapons. Now he understood. They were preparing pilots for something else entirely. Porter's radar beeped. Second contact bearing 047 degrees. Range 9 miles. Altitude 6,000 feet. Descending. Smith turned toward the intercept. His mind was racing. The intelligence report made sense now. One target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. They knew something unusual was out here. They sent Smith because he was trained for this. One of 12 pilots in the entire Army Air Force cleared for Project Nightfall operations. But why were Japanese bombers mixed with unknowns? Were the Japanese encountering the same phenomena? Or was something else happening? Smith climbed to 7,000 feet. Porter called corrections. Range 7 miles, 6 miles, 5 miles. Through the darkness, Smith saw flashes. Lightning? No. Too regular, too precise. Explosions. Someone else was fighting. But the only American night fighter in this sector was Smith, and ground radar had not reported any other contacts. Porter confirmed it. Major, I am tracking weapons fire. But there are no friendly aircraft in range. The Japanese are shooting at something. At what? Unknown. Wait. I have the second bomber on scope. Bearing 052 degrees. Range 3 miles. But there is another return. Smaller. Faster. Circling the bomber. Smith pushed throttles to maximum power. The Black Widow surged forward. Range 2 miles. He could see the bomber now. A Betty. Mitsubishi G4M. Standard Japanese medium bomber. But it was maneuvering erratically. Diving. Climbing. Turning hard. Combat maneuvers. Trying to evade something. Smith scanned the sky, looking for the smaller contact Porter had mentioned. There. A light. Small. Bright. Moving in ways that made Smith's brain hurt. 90-degree turns at high speed. Instant acceleration. Instant stops. No aircraft could do that. Nothing human could survive those maneuvers. The light approached the bomber. The bomber's gunners opened fire. Tracer rounds streamed into darkness. None of them hit. The light danced around the tracers effortlessly. Then it stopped, hovering, completely stationary in midair. Smith had never seen anything hover except helicopters. And this was no helicopter. The light pulsed once, bright enough to illuminate the Betty bomber completely. Smith saw the aircraft in perfect detail for 3 seconds. Rising sun markings on the wings. Crew visible in the cockpit. Gunners in the dorsal turret tracking the light desperately. Then, the light vanished. The bomber exploded 2 seconds later. Same blue-white flames. Same impossible tumbling motion. Same glowing debris. Smith had not fired a single round. Porter's voice was shaking. Major, what just happened? Smith could not answer. His training had covered unknown contacts, strange radar returns, unusual aerial phenomena. But the training had not covered this. Watching something destroy an enemy aircraft using methods that did not exist in 1944, or any year Smith knew about. He keyed his microphone. Porter, are you recording this? Every second. The radar data is being transmitted automatically to base. Seeing everything we see. Good. Vector me to the third target. Major, are we still engaging? Smith thought about the classified envelope. The intelligence report, all targets. Those were his orders. Whatever was happening out here, Command wanted these aircraft destroyed. All of them. Japanese or otherwise. Yes. We engage. Smith checked his ammunition. 752 rounds remaining. He had fired 48 on the first target. The second target had destroyed itself, or something else had destroyed it. Either way, Smith had enough ammunition for 17 more intercepts at his current rate. But he was starting to understand that ammunition might not be the limiting factor tonight. I want to know something. Where are you listening to this from right now? What time is it where you are? Are you hearing this story at 3 in the morning when you cannot sleep? Or during your morning commute? Or maybe late afternoon while you are supposed to be working? Drop a comment. Tell me your city and what time it is. Because what happened next to Smith over those Philippine waters is about to get even stranger. And I want to know how many of you are still with me as we go deeper into this. Because in 60 seconds, Smith was going to encounter something that the military would classify for 40 years. Range 4 miles to the third target. Smith's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was calculating probabilities. 2 bombers down, 1 he killed, 1 killed by something else. 10 targets remaining. Fuel at 87%. Still workable. Still possible. Then Porter said something that changed the equation completely. Major, the third target is not a bomber. Smith glanced at his radar scope. The return looked identical to the previous 2. What is it? Fighter. Nakajima-ki, 84 Frank. And it is heading directly toward us. Japanese fighters did not fly solo night missions over water. They lacked the navigation equipment. They lacked the fuel range. They definitely did not hunt American aircraft in total darkness without ground control guidance. But Porter's radar did not lie. Smith armed his cannons. How far? 3 miles. Closing fast. He is accelerating. Speed now 280 knots. 290. 300. The Ki-84 Frank was one of Japan's best fighters. Fast, maneuverable, deadly in daylight combat, but at night, impossible. The pilot would be flying blind. No radar. No instruments for night navigation. Just darkness and instinct and a prayer. Unless the pilot was not alone. Smith remembered the light. The object that had destroyed the second bomber. What if Japanese pilots had encountered these phenomena too? What if they were learning to follow them? Use them as guides through darkness? 2 miles. Smith could see the fighter now. Or rather, he could see what was with it. Another light. Smaller than the first one. Different color. Reddish instead of white. Moving alongside the Frank in perfect formation. The Japanese pilot was following it. Using it as a beacon. Porter's voice was tight. Major, the light is emitting electromagnetic interference. My radar is flickering. If we get closer, I might lose contact with everything. Smith had a choice. Break off the intercept. Maintain radar capability. Stay connected to the 10 remaining targets. Or close with this fighter and risk flying blind if Porter's equipment failed. He chose the fighter. Closing to 1 mile. The reddish light moved erratically now. The Frank struggled to keep pace. The Japanese pilot was good, very good, but he was fighting his aircraft through maneuvers that pushed the limits of the airframe, following something that did not care about physics. Smith positioned the Black Widow below and behind, his favorite attack angle. The Frank pilot could not see him. No rearward visibility in darkness, no warning, just Smith's cannons and 2 seconds of firing time. But Smith hesitated. Something felt wrong. The Frank was not flying evasively, not searching for threats. The pilot was focused entirely on following the light, obsessed with it, like he had forgotten there was a war happening around him. Smith had seen this before, not in combat, in training films during Project Nightfall, footage of test pilots tracking experimental aircraft. The pilots developed tunnel vision, fixed on the target, toward everything else. The instructors called it phenomenon fixation. They said it happened to pilots who encountered certain types of unknowns. The objects created psychological effects, drew attention, made pilots forget training and instincts. Porter confirmed it. Major, I am picking up unusual radio emissions from the light, low frequency, almost subsonic. It might be affecting the pilot. Affecting him how? Making him follow, the same way certain sounds can disorient people, make them compliant. Smith understood. The Frank pilot was not choosing to follow the light. He was compelled, mesmerized, flying deeper into darkness because something was leading him there, which meant this was not a combat situation. It was a rescue. Smith keyed his radio to the emergency frequency. Japanese fighter, break left. Break left now. No response. The Frank continued following the light. Smith tried again. Nakajima Frank, you are being tracked by American night fighter. Disengage and return to base. Nothing. Either the pilot's radio was off, or he could not hear anything except whatever frequency that light was broadcasting. The light began descending, leading the Frank toward the ocean, toward the water where the first 2 bombers had crashed, where wreckage was still burning, with those strange blue-white flames. Smith made a decision that violated every rule of aerial combat. He maneuvered the Black Widow alongside the Frank, close enough to be visible, close enough that even in darkness, the Japanese pilot might see his silhouette. The Frank pilot did not react, did not turn, did not acknowledge Smith's presence, just kept following the light downward. 3,000 feet altitude, 2,000, 1,000. Smith fired his cannons, not at the Frank, at the light. 48 rounds, 2 seconds. Tracer rounds drawing red lines across darkness. The shells passed through the light. No impact, no explosion, no effect whatsoever. Like shooting at a ghost. But the Frank pilot snapped out of his trance. Smith saw the aircraft jerk. Bank hard right, full power, climbing desperately. The pilot had regained control. The light stopped descending. It hung in the air for 3 seconds, pulsing. Then it moved, directly toward Smith. Porter shouted a warning. It is coming at us. 300 knots. 400. 500. Smith threw the Black Widow into a hard left turn. Maximum G-force. The airframe groaned. His vision narrowed. Gray tunnel vision from acceleration. He held the turn, felt the aircraft shuddering, on the edge of stalling. The light passed overhead. So close, Smith felt heat through the canopy. Not engine heat, something else. Something that made his skin prickle, and his instruments flicker, and his radio scream with static. Then it was gone. Vanished. Porter's radar showed nothing, just empty sky. Smith leveled out, breathing hard. His hands were shaking now. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization that he had just fired on something that did not care about bullets. Something that moved through space like the rules did not apply. Porter's voice was barely a whisper. The Frank is heading north, full speed. He is running. Let him go. But our orders said all targets. I know what the orders said. Smith checked his fuel. 79%. Let him go. He is out of it now. He will make it home. Smith did not mention the real reason. The Frank pilot had seen what Smith had seen, experienced what Smith had experienced. That pilot would file a report, tell his commanders about lights in the darkness, objects that did not behave like aircraft, and Japanese intelligence would classify it, bury it, the same way American intelligence was doing. Both sides were encountering the same phenomena. Both sides were keeping it secret, which meant something larger was happening, something beyond the war. Porter broke the silence. Major, I need to tell you something else. During my debrief 3 weeks ago, the intelligence officers showed me statistical data. Foo Fighter encounters in European theater. Phenomenon reports from Pacific theater. Unknown contact sightings from every active war zone. And the encounters are increasing, exponentially. In 1942, there were 12 documented incidents. 1943, 47 incidents. 1944 through November, 218 incidents. And December is not finished yet. Smith felt cold spread through his chest. What are they saying is causing it? They are not saying anything. That is the problem. They are collecting data, classifying reports, monitoring the situation. But they have no explanation, no theory, nothing, except more questions and more secrecy. How many of the 12 pilots in Project Nightfall have encountered these objects? Porter was quiet for a moment. All of them. You are the last. Every pilot who graduated from that program has filed at least one phenomenon report. 5 pilots have filed multiple reports. 2 pilots were pulled from combat duty after encountering objects that followed them for over an hour. Smith wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know details, but his radar scope was showing 8 contacts remaining, 8 bombers, or 8 unknowns, or some combination. He had fuel for maybe 90 more minutes. He had ammunition for 15 more intercepts if he maintained discipline. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was waiting that his training had not prepared him for. Something that could destroy bombers without firing a shot. Something that could mesmerize pilots and lead them to their deaths. Something that appeared and disappeared, according to rules Smith did not understand. Vector me to the next target, Porter. Major, are you sure? Smith thought about the classified envelope, the intelligence report, the months of training for scenarios that seemed impossible, the 12 pilots selected for psychological profiles that indicated they could handle the unexplained. Command knew this was happening. They were sending prepared pilots into situations where normal pilots would break, where normal pilots would panic and crash and die without understanding why. Smith was not going to break. Not tonight. Not ever. I am sure. Next target. Porter checked his scope. Contact bearing 015 degrees. Range 12 miles. Altitude 10,000 feet. Radar signature matches Betty Bomber. But Major, there is something else with it. Another light. And this one is different from the others. Bigger. Brighter. And it is moving in a pattern I have never seen before. Show me. The light was dancing. Not moving. Not flying. Dancing. Smith had no other word for it. The object traced patterns in the darkness. Geometric shapes. Circles. Triangles. Figure eights. Perfect precision. Mathematical beauty. Like someone was writing equations in the sky using light as ink. Porter tried to describe what his radar was showing, but words failed him. The return signature keeps splitting into multiple returns, then merging back into one. Then it creates a grid pattern. Then it becomes a spiral. I have never seen anything like this. Smith climbed to 12,000 feet. His oxygen mask hissed. The air was thin, cold. The Black Widow's engines labored slightly. He was pushing the aircraft near its operational ceiling. But the Betty Bomber ahead was at 10,000 feet with that light circling it. And Smith needed altitude advantage. Range 8 miles. Smith could see both targets now. The bomber flew steady, straight line. No deviation, as if on autopilot, which was impossible because Japanese bombers did not have sophisticated autopilot systems in 1944. The light was another matter entirely. It moved at speeds that made Smith's eyes hurt trying to track it. Then it stopped, instant deceleration, hovering, then acceleration to impossible velocity in a different direction. No transition, no arc, just instantaneous direction changes that would kill any pilot from G-forces. Porter was narrating the radar data, like a sports announcer, calling a game he did not understand. Object velocity, now 600 knots, now stationary, now 800 knots perpendicular vector, now splitting into 3 separate returns, now merging. Now it is gone. Wait, it is back. Different position, like it teleported. Smith had read classified reports during Project Nightfall training. European theater pilots described similar phenomena. Foo fighters that appeared and disappeared, objects that seemed to violate causality. Here, one moment, gone the next, reappearing somewhere else without traversing the space between. The scientific term was non-locality. The practical term was impossible. Range 5 miles. Smith checked his ammunition. 704 rounds. Fuel at 71%. The mathematics were still holding. Barely. Then the light stopped dancing. It positioned itself directly in front of the bomber, matching speed, matching altitude, flying in perfect formation. And Smith realized what he was seeing. The light was escorting the bomber. Not attacking it. Not destroying it. Protecting it. Guiding it. The same way fighter escorts protected bomber formations during daylight raids. But this was no fighter. This was something else performing the same function. Porter confirmed Smith's observation. Major, the bomber has been on this exact heading for 18 minutes. Straight line from northern Philippine Islands toward Muro. The light appeared 14 minutes ago and has maintained formation position since. Whatever it is, the light is helping the bomber reach its target. Smith felt pieces clicking together. Japanese bombers attacking every night for 2 weeks. 334 air raid alerts. Impossible numbers for the Japanese Air Forces in December 1944. They had suffered massive losses. Fuel shortages. Depleted pilot reserves. They should not have the resources for sustained night operations. Unless they were getting help. What if the lights were assisting Japanese aircraft? Providing navigation, guidance, protection from American night fighters. That would explain the sustained attacks. The unusual accuracy of the bombing runs. The fact that Japanese pilots were successfully conducting night operations they had never been capable of before. But why would unknown phenomena help the Japanese? What possible motivation could these objects have for taking sides in a human war? Smith did not have time to theorize. Range 3 miles. Time to engage. He positioned the Black Widow for attack. Below and behind the bomber. Standard intercept. But he kept one eye on the light, waiting for it to react, waiting for it to turn and come at him the way the previous light had done. The light did nothing, just maintained formation with the bomber, as if Smith did not exist. Range 1 mile. Smith could see the Betty clearly now. The light illuminated it. Not bright enough to blind, but enough to see every detail. Engines, wings, fuselage, crew positions, even the markings on the tail. Everything visible in that steady glow. Too visible. Smith realized he was being shown the target. The light was illuminating the bomber deliberately, presenting it like an offering, like this was exactly what was supposed to happen. Porter sensed it too. Major, this feels like a trap, Smith agreed. But his orders were clear. All targets. Engage all targets. He centered the bomber in his gun sight. Range 600 yards. Closing 500. His finger moved to the trigger. The light changed color, from white to deep red, pulsing. Warning. Smith hesitated. Every instinct told him to break off. Every hour of training told him to disengage. But the intelligence briefing had been explicit. One target does not match known Japanese aircraft signatures. They knew about the lights. They were testing something, using Smith to test it. He squeezed the trigger. 4 cannons fired. 48 rounds. 2 seconds. The bomber's right wing disintegrated. Standard kill. Fuel tanks exploded. Orange flames this time. Normal flames. The bomber rolled and entered a death spiral. Crew had no chance. Smith watched it fall. Standard combat result. Nothing unusual, except the light. It did not move, did not react, just hovered where the bomber had been, pulsing red. Then the color shifted. Red to orange, orange to yellow, yellow to white, white to blue, blue to something beyond blue, that Smith had no name for. Colors that should not exist. Colors his eyes registered but his brain could not process. Porter's voice was wrong, distorted, like the radio was failing. Major, the radar. Everything is. Static. Then, nothing. Radio dead. Radar dead. All electronic systems flickering. Smith was alone. He could not see his instruments. The panel lights were out. Backup lights failed. He had no airspeed indicator, no altimeter, no fuel gauge, no compass. Just darkness and the light ahead, changing colors in a sequence that felt like language. Communication. Like it was trying to tell him something. Then Smith heard it. Not through the radio, through the air itself, through his bones. A sound that was not a sound. A frequency below hearing but felt in every cell. A vibration that made his teeth ache and his vision blur and his thoughts scatter into fragments. The light was inside his head. Not thoughts. Not words. Images. A bomber falling. Not the one he just shot down. A different bomber. Future. Tomorrow. Next week. Falling in flames. But the flames were not normal. They were the blue-white flames he had seen earlier. The wrong flames. And Smith was firing. His cannons destroying something that looked like a bomber, but was not a bomber. Something wearing a bomber's shape like camouflage. Like costume. The vision ended. Smith's instruments flickered back to life. Radio returned. Porter was shouting, "Major! Major! Respond! Are you there?" Smith could barely speak. "I am here." "What happened?" "You went silent for 43 seconds. 43 seconds. It had felt like hours. Smith checked his position. He had climbed 2,000 feet during the blackout. No memory of it. No awareness. Autopilot had kept him flying, but his conscious mind had been somewhere else. Seeing something else. The light was gone. Empty sky. Porter's radar showed nothing. Smith checked his ammunition. 656 rounds. He had fired 48 rounds at the bomber. The math was wrong. He should have 704 remaining. He was missing 48 rounds. 2 seconds of firing. But he had only fired once. At the bomber. He had not fired during the blackout. Had he? Porter interrupted his thoughts. "Major, I have the next contact. But you need to hear this first. While you were offline, I received a transmission. Encrypted. Command frequency. They said mission parameters have changed. They said to continue engaging all targets, but to maintain minimum safe distance from phenomenon contacts. They said data collection is primary objective now. Confirmation of kills is secondary." Smith understood. Command was not concerned with shooting down bombers anymore. They were using this mission to study the lights, collect data, observe interactions. Smith was not a night fighter pilot tonight. He was a test subject, an experiment. And the lights knew it. The fourth bomber was waiting at 15,000 feet. Smith climbed toward it. Fuel at 63%. Ammunition at 656 rounds. Time at 0142 hours. He had been flying for 1 hour 42 minutes. Mathematics said he had 63 minutes remaining. 5 more intercepts maximum before fuel exhaustion forced him back to base. But Porter's radar was showing 7 targets remaining. 7 bombers, 7 lights, 7 opportunities for command to collect more data about phenomena that did not obey the rules of known physics. 7 chances for Smith to lose another 43 seconds. Or longer. Or permanently. He pushed the throttle forward anyway, because that was what the 12 pilots of Project Nightfall were selected to do. Fly into situations that broke normal pilots. Document the impossible. Survive the unexplainable. And never speak about it afterward. Smith was halfway through his mission. Halfway through a night that would be classified for 40 years. Halfway to becoming the answer to a question most people did not know existed. What happens when a trained pilot encounters something that should not be real? He keeps flying, he keeps fighting, and he hopes he is still himself when it is over. Smith was wrong about the 4th bomber. It was not at 15,000 feet. Porter had read the altitude correctly, but the aircraft itself was descending. Fast, 3,000 feet per minute. Combat emergency descent. Like the crew was trying to escape something. Porter tracked it. 13,000 feet. 10,000. 7,000. The bomber was diving toward the ocean in a barely controlled fall. Smith nosed the Black Widow down, following, trying to intercept. But something was off about the entire situation. The radar return was flickering, fading in and out. Like the aircraft was phasing between existence and non-existence. 5,000 feet. Smith pushed the throttles to maximum. The engine screamed. The airframe shook. Exceeding recommended dive speed, but he needed to close the distance before the bomber reached the water. 3,000 feet. Smith finally got visual contact, and his brain stopped working for 3 seconds. The bomber was not a bomber. Not exactly. It had the basic shape, wings, fuselage, engines, but the proportions were wrong, too long, too narrow, and it was translucent. Smith could see through parts of it, see the ocean below through the fuselage, like looking at a ghost, a memory of an aircraft rather than the aircraft itself. Porter was seeing it too on radar. The return is doing something impossible. It is showing as solid and empty simultaneously, like the radar is receiving 2 signals from the same location. One says there is an aircraft. One says there is nothing. Smith blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, trying to make sense of what his eyes reported. The aircraft solidified, became opaque, completely normal Betty bomber, then faded again, translucent, then solid, oscillating, flickering between states. He had seen this before. In the classified footage during Project Nightfall training, film taken over Germany. British bomber crews reporting Foo Fighters. One film showed a German fighter that appeared and disappeared, phasing in and out of visibility. The instructors had no explanation. They just showed the footage, told the pilots they might encounter similar phenomena, told them to remain calm. Remaining calm was not the problem. Understanding was the problem. 2,000 feet. The bomber leveled out, stopped descending, flew straight and level, but it was still flickering, still oscillating between solid and transparent, and now Smith could see inside it when it went transparent. See the crew. See the bombs in the bay. See equipment. All flickering with the same rhythm. Then he saw something that made no sense whatsoever. The crew was not moving. Frozen. Not dead. Not unconscious. Frozen in time. One crew member's arm raised halfway to a control panel. Another turning his head. Another reaching for a weapon. All caught mid-motion. Statues. Porter confirmed it with radar data. Major, the aircraft is not emitting engine heat signatures. The propellers are not rotating. It is gliding, but it maintains altitude and speed. That is aerodynamically impossible. Smith positioned for attack anyway, range 800 yards. He armed cannons, prepared to fire. But something stopped him. Not fear, not hesitation, curiosity. He needed to understand what he was seeing before he destroyed it. He flew alongside the bomber instead. Close formation, 50 feet separation. Close enough to see every detail. The aircraft was a Nakajima Ki 49 Helen bomber. Correct identification, correct markings, correct paint scheme. Everything matched intelligence photos, except it kept phasing between solid and transparent, and the crew was frozen, and the engines were not running. Smith keyed his radio. Porter, are you recording this? Every second. Good, because I do not think anyone will believe it otherwise. Smith maintained formation for 90 seconds, studying the bomber, looking for details, clues, anything that would explain what he was seeing. He noticed symbols painted on the fuselage, not standard military markings, something else. Characters he did not recognize, not Japanese, not Chinese, not any language Smith had seen. Then the bomber solidified, completely opaque, and the crew moved, sudden motion. Like someone pressed play on a stopped film. The frozen crew members completed their movements. The pilot turned his head, saw Smith's Black Widow. His eyes went wide. The bomber banked hard. Combat maneuver. The crew knew Smith was there now, but they had not known before. Like they had been somewhere else, some other place, some other time, and now they were back. Smith dropped behind and below. Attack position, range 400 yards. He centered the Helen in his gun sight, but before he could fire, the bomber began flickering again, fading. The crew slowed, stopped, frozen again. Porter shouted a warning. Major, electromagnetic interference. Same pattern as before. The light is coming. Smith looked up, saw it. Not the red light, not the white light. This one was different. Multiple colors simultaneously. Prismatic. Looking at a rainbow condensed into a sphere. And it was not dancing. It was stationary. Positioned exactly between Smith and the bomber, blocking his line of fire. The light pulsed once. Smith's instruments died again. Radio, radar, navigation, everything. But this time he stayed conscious. This time he could see what happened. The bomber changed. Not fading, not flickering, transforming. The shape remained, but the substance altered. Metal became something else. Something that looked like metal but reflected light wrong. Absorbed it, bent it. The aircraft looked two-dimensional, flat, like a photograph hanging in empty space. Then it was gone, not destroyed, not crashed, just absent. The space it had occupied was empty, no explosion, no debris, no trace. The light remained for 5 seconds. Then it moved, not toward Smith this time, away, straight up, accelerating. Smith watched it climb, 1,000 feet per second, 2,000, 3,000. It disappeared into the stratosphere in 8 seconds. Gone. His instruments returned. Porter was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "Did that just happen?" Smith checked his ammunition. 656 rounds. He had not fired. The bomber was gone, but he had not destroyed it. The light had taken it. Or the bomber had gone somewhere on its own. Or reality had malfunctioned, and the aircraft had simply stopped existing. Smith did not know which explanation was correct. He suspected all of them were wrong. Porter checked his radar. 5 targets remaining, all showing standard signatures now. No anomalies, no interference. Just regular Betty bombers at various altitudes heading toward Muro. Smith checked fuel. 54%, 350 gallons, 45 minutes flying time. The mathematics were collapsing. He could intercept maybe 3 more bombers before fuel exhaustion. 2 would reach Muro. The mission was failing. But Smith realized something else. Command did not care if some bombers got through. They cared about the data, the observations, the documentation of impossible events. Smith shooting down standard bombers was routine. Smith encountering phenomenon contacts was the actual mission objective, which meant the remaining 5 bombers were probably normal. Regular Japanese aircraft. No lights, no anomalies. Just standard targets requiring standard intercepts. Unless Command was wrong about what was out here. Unless the lights had their own agenda, their own reasons for appearing and disappearing, their own criteria for which aircraft they protected and which they ignored. Smith vectored toward the 5th target. Porter guided him, bearing 073 degrees, range 14 miles, altitude 9,000 feet, standard Betty bomber. No unusual characteristics detected. Smith climbed to 11,000 feet, attack altitude. His oxygen mask hissed. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing, trying to process what he had seen, trying to fit impossible observations into a framework of known physics and known technology. He could not do it. The events did not fit. The data contradicted itself. Aircraft that phased between solid and transparent, crews frozen in time, lights that violated causality, bombers that disappeared without exploding. And Smith was supposed to write a report about this. File an incident summary. Use military terminology to describe the indescribable. Use technical language to explain the unexplainable. Project Nightfall had trained him for encounters with unknowns, but the training had focused on psychological preparation, remaining calm, continuing the mission, not panicking. The training had not addressed the fundamental problem. How do you report something that should not exist? How do you document reality breaking? Range 8 miles to the 5th target. Smith armed his cannons. This time the bomber would be normal. This time it would be a standard kill. Orange flames, predictable debris pattern, physics working correctly. He hoped he was right, because his fuel was running low and his mind was fragmenting, and he still had 5 targets remaining. And somewhere in the darkness, the lights were watching, learning, preparing for something Smith did not understand. The mission was only halfway finished. Smith was beginning to suspect that what happened tonight would follow him for the rest of his life. The 5th bomber was ordinary, perfectly, devastatingly ordinary. Smith closed to 400 yards. Fired. 2-second burst. The Betty's wing exploded in normal orange flames. Normal trajectory. Normal debris pattern. The bomber fell in a normal spiral and hit the ocean in a normal splash. Everything exactly as it should be, which somehow made it worse. Because now Smith knew the difference. Could feel the difference between shooting down an actual aircraft and shooting down whatever those other things had been. The weight of it. The reality of it. 7 men just died in that bomber. 7 humans who woke up this morning not knowing tonight would be their last night. Who wrote letters home, who had families. Who were following orders just like Smith was following orders. The other contacts had not felt like that. The phasing bomber with its frozen crew. The translucent aircraft that disappeared. Those had felt like shooting at projections, simulations. Something wearing the shape of bombers without being bombers. But this one was real. And Smith had just killed 7 people. Porter's voice cut through his thoughts. 4 targets remaining. But Major, something is wrong with the pattern. What pattern? They are not heading toward Muro anymore. They changed course 3 minutes ago. They are heading west, out to sea, away from any strategic target. Smith checked his fuel gauge. 46%. 30 minutes flying time. He could intercept maybe 2 more bombers before he had to turn back. 2 kills, which meant 2 bombers would escape. Mission failure by any conventional metric. But Command had changed the parameters. Data collection primary, kills secondary, which meant Smith's job was to follow those bombers, see where they went, document what happened. Vector me to the closest target. Bearing 270 degrees, range 16 miles, altitude 7,000 feet, standard Betty bomber. Wait, Major, I am picking up additional contacts, multiple small returns, 20 miles west. They are stationary, hovering over the ocean. How many? Porter was silent for a moment, counting. 12, no. 15, no. They keep appearing and disappearing. I cannot get an accurate count, but there are at least a dozen, maybe more. All in a cluster formation, all hovering, and the remaining bombers are heading directly toward them. Smith felt ice spread through his chest. This was it, the real reason for tonight's mission. Not attacking Muro, not bombing American airfields. The Japanese bombers were meeting something. A rendezvous. Coordinates and timing prearranged, and Smith had been sent to observe it. He pushed throttles forward. Maximum continuous power. The Black Widow accelerated, but 16 miles at maximum speed still meant 4 minutes flying time, and his fuel situation was critical. If he went west to investigate those contacts, he might not have enough fuel to return to Muro, might have to ditch in the ocean. Hope for rescue. Hope the lights did not decide to intervene. Smith made the decision anyway, because whatever was happening 20 miles west was more important than his survival, more important than his aircraft, more important than mission protocols. Porter guided him. Range 12 miles, 10 miles, 8 miles. The small contacts were becoming clearer on radar. Not aircraft, not ships, something else. Objects hovering at various altitudes between 2,000 and 10,000 feet, distributed in a 3-dimensional formation, like a net, or a cage, or a gateway. Smith climbed to 9,000 feet, positioning himself above the formation. Visual range now. He could see them. Lights. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Different colors. Different sizes. Some steady. Some pulsing. Some moving in small circles. Some perfectly stationary. They formed a geometric pattern. Precise. Mathematical. Beautiful in a way that made Smith's eyes hurt. And the 4 bombers were flying into it. Not attacking. Not firing. Flying in formation toward the center of the light pattern. Deliberately. Intentionally. Like they had been summoned. Smith watched the first bomber enter the formation, pass between 2 large lights. Nothing happened. The bomber continued, past another light. Heading toward the center, where the largest concentration of objects hovered. Then the bomber flickered. Same effect Smith had seen before. Solid. Transparent. Solid. The crew visible when it went transparent. All frozen. All looking forward. All focused on something Smith could not see. The bomber reached the center of the formation. Stopped. Hovering. Engines still running, but the aircraft motionless in midair. Impossible. But happening. The lights began moving, circling the bomber. Faster. Creating a vortex. A whirlpool of light. The bomber at the center, rotating slowly, not from its own power. Being turned by something external. Porter was trying to describe the radar data but failing. The returns are merging, separating. The bomber signature is fragmenting. It is showing in multiple locations simultaneously. Like it exists in several places at once. This is not possible. This cannot be happening. But it was happening. Smith watched the second bomber enter the formation. Same result. Flickering, stopping, hovering. The lights circling it, creating another vortex. Then the third bomber. Then the fourth. All 4 aircraft suspended in midair. All 4 surrounded by spinning lights. All 4 phasing between states. Between solid and transparent. Between present and absent. Smith armed his cannons. He had 656 rounds remaining. enough to destroy all 4 bombers if he fired carefully. But his hands would not move, could not move, because he understood now that firing would be pointless. The bombers were not really there anymore. Not entirely. They were transitioning, going somewhere, becoming something. Porter confirmed it. Major, the radar signatures are fading. The bombers are disappearing, but not like before, not suddenly, gradually, like they are moving away at impossible speed, or sinking into the ocean, or rising into space. The returns are dropping in intensity, 50%, 30%, 10%. Smith watched through his canopy. The bombers were becoming transparent, see-through, ghosts, the crews still visible but fading, looking forward at something beyond Smith's perception, beyond his reality. Then they were gone. All 4 aircraft vanished. The lights remained for 3 seconds, then they began ascending, all of them simultaneously. Vertical trajectory, accelerating. Smith watched them climb, tracked them visually until they became stars, then smaller than stars, then invisible. Porter's radar showed empty sky. No contacts, no interference, nothing. Smith checked his clock. 02:17 hours. He had been flying for 2 hours 17 minutes. His fuel gauge showed 38%, maybe 25 minutes remaining, not enough to search for additional targets, barely enough to return to Murrow. The mission was over. 4 confirmed kills, 2 standard bombers destroyed conventionally, 1 bomber killed by unknown phenomenon, 1 bomber disappeared by unknown means, 4 additional bombers observed entering unknown formation and vanishing. No explanation, no theory, just observations of impossible events. Smith turned southeast, heading for home. Porter plotted the return course. 112 miles, 22 minutes, at current speed and altitude. Fuel would be critical, but manageable. They flew in silence for 15 minutes, neither man speaking, both processing what they had witnessed, both knowing they would file reports that made them sound insane, both knowing the reports would be classified, buried, forgotten by everyone except the 12 pilots of Project Nightfall, who encountered similar phenomena and were ordered never to discuss it. Finally, Porter broke the silence. Major, what do you think they were? Smith had been asking himself the same question. Advanced technology? Extraterrestrial craft? Psychological warfare? Mass hallucination despite 2-person confirmation? Time travelers? Interdimensional visitors? None of the explanations fit the data. All of the explanations were equally impossible. I do not know. But I know someone wanted us to see it. This whole mission was observation. We were sent here to witness and document, not to stop the bombers, to watch what happened to them. Why us? Because we are the 12 pilots who tested positive for whatever psychological profile makes someone capable of witnessing this without breaking. We see impossible things and keep flying, keep functioning, keep filing reports. That is what Project Nightfall was actually selecting for, not night fighting ability. Resistance to ontological shock. Porter was quiet for a moment. Do you think the war is real, or is the war just cover for this? For studying these phenomena? Smith had no answer. Both could be true simultaneously. The war was real. Men were dying. But something else was happening underneath it. Something using the chaos of global conflict as cover, as opportunity, as laboratory. Murrow appeared ahead. The airfield blacked out but visible on radar. Smith began his descent. Landing configuration. Gear down. Flaps extended. Porter talked him through the approach. Smith's hands moved automatically. Muscle memory. Training taking over, while his conscious mind was still 20 miles west, watching bombers disappear into light. The wheels touched coral at 02:41 hours, 2 hours 41 minutes total flight time. Smith had 5% fuel remaining, 3 minutes. The margin between successful return and ditching in the ocean. Ground crews appeared with flashlights, guided him to parking. Engines shut down. Smith sat in the cockpit for a full minute, not moving, not climbing out, just sitting, breathing, existing in normal space-time after 2 hours of witnessing reality malfunction. Porter climbed out first, stood next to the aircraft, looked up at the sky. Smith knew what he was looking for, the lights, wondering if they were still up there, still watching, still collecting data on the humans who had observed them. Smith finally climbed out. His legs were weak, not from fear, from the effort of maintaining sanity while witnessing insanity, of functioning normally while experiencing the abnormal, of flying a machine that obeyed physics while observing objects that did not. Intelligence officers arrived at 0300 hours. Different officers than usual. Unmarked uniforms. No insignia. No names. They separated Smith and Porter immediately. Individual debriefs in different buildings. Standard procedure for classified missions. Make sure the stories matched. Check for inconsistencies. Validate observations through independent testimony. Smith's debrief lasted 4 hours. The officers asked precise questions. Altitude of contacts, speed, colors, radar signatures, duration of phenomena. Exactly what Smith saw when the bomber phased between states. Exactly how the lights moved. Exactly what happened when the bombers disappeared. They took notes, recorded everything, showed no emotion, no surprise, no skepticism, like they had heard similar accounts before. At 0700 hours, they finished. Smith signed documents, non-disclosure agreements, classification acknowledgments, statements confirming he understood that discussing this mission with anyone outside proper channels would result in court-martial, possible treason charges, imprisonment. The senior officer looked at Smith directly. You did well tonight, Major. You maintained composure during extremely unusual circumstances. You documented important data. Command is pleased. Smith asked the question that had been growing since he landed. What were they? The officer's expression did not change. We do not know yet, but we are learning. Every mission like yours adds to our understanding. Eventually, we will have answers. When? The officer almost smiled. That depends on how many more nights like tonight we need. How many more pilots like you encounter these objects and bring back reliable observations. The war will not last forever, but this will. Whatever this is, it was here before the war. It will be here after. We are just trying to understand our place in it. Smith left the debriefing room. Porter was waiting outside. They walked back to their quarters without speaking, both knowing they could never discuss what happened, both knowing they would spend the rest of their lives remembering it, both knowing they were now part of something larger than any war, larger than any nation, something that most humans would never know existed. Smith flew one more mission on December 30th, shot down one more fighter. 7th confirmed kill. The mission was classified for 40 years. When the documents were finally released in 1984, most of the interesting details were redacted. Black bars covering the sections about lights, about impossible maneuvers, about bombers that disappeared. Smith never spoke publicly about December 29th, 1944, never wrote memoirs, never gave interviews. He died in 1989, taking his secrets with him. But the data survived, the reports, the radar recordings, the testimony, buried in archives, classified, forgotten by almost everyone, until now. If this story affected you the way it affected me when I found it in those declassified documents, do something for me. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because there are more stories like this. More pilots who encountered things they could not explain. More missions that got classified for decades. More evidence that something was happening in our skies during World War II that had nothing to do with the war itself. The story does not end here. Smith was one of 12 pilots. I am working on finding the others. Their missions, their encounters, their observations. This is just the beginning.